Hello everyone, my name is Vrinda and welcome to Book Nug Chats. So today is going to be my May reading wrap up and I am ready. I'm ready to discuss all the books that I read in May. I actually had a very interesting reading month. I read some contemporary romance, I read some mystery, I read some short literary fiction, I read some middle grade fantasy, some classic fantasy, some Eastern fantasy, a dark academia novel as well. I was also quite restless this month, so there was a point where I was with 4 to 5 books. I was dipping my toes into each of them to see what I might be in the mood for. Somewhere mid-May, I did fall into a good flow of reading, and I found some really great 5-star reads this month. I also picked up a lot of books from a small local library that I have access to here, and that's one of the things I love about a library. I didn't really have any set plan to what I wanted to read this month. I wanted it to be a lighter reading month, which is why I didn't pick up or read any series. Everything I read were standalone books, and I love the feeling of going to a library where you can just happen upon books that you had no idea existed, and that maybe you didn't plan to read, but you're just so pleasantly surprised. So that was my experience this May, and I'm excited to get into it. I think I'm going to structure this video in terms of the categories. So of different genres that I read this month. I think that would be a good breakup for this video. So in total, I read 11 books. 3 of them were short stories. Moving into June, I'm being very intentional and selective with the books that I read. I am trying not to read too much. I want to take my time with the books that I read. So I'm getting back to some duologies and series. I actually love a good duology because, I don't know, it's just like a good length than a trilogy. Just 2 books and it's a complete story. So that's it for the intro. Let's get right into it. So let me first get started with the 2 middle grade fantasy books that I read. I feel middle grade fantasy is such a good genre. It's the perfect cozy light fantasy reads. It's just simple storytelling. It's meaningful. It has good themes, and I can appreciate a good story wherever I find it. Also, I feel there are many good books and stories that I didn't get around to reading, perhaps when I was in that age range, and so I'm loving exploring some books now because why not? And I'm also surprised. I also find that sometimes the quality of storytelling is so good in some of these books. And it's also interesting for me. I'm able to observe how there are all these elements that make a good story and how they're captured in this one book for younger readers. The way I rate these books, I'm also a little bit more lenient because I know that I'm not the target audience, so I'm not trying to look for a great degree of depth. Anyway, coming to the 2 reads that I had this month, both are ones I picked up and just came across in the library, and I was so happy. They're just the perfect cozy, light, adventurous, fantasy reads. So firstly, I was looking for something which would be a good dragon fantasy adventure, and I came across Wings of Fire by Tui Sutherland. I absolutely loved this. I wasn't expecting it to be only dragons. I thought there would be humans in it, but there weren't. It's just dragons. And I have to say that these dragons have more personality than a lot of human characters that I've read. This is also really adventurous, fast-paced, and there is a whole political element to this book. It's also a longer series. I think there are 9 to 10 books, which is great. This was so good. It actually has a whole map. There are also different classes or categories of dragons, which I thought was so interesting, and they actually have in the beginning a chart which shows the different kind of dragons, their traits, their features, the abilities that they have, the unique characteristics, and then who the queen is, and then the alliances that they have, because this is kind of set in a kingdom which is at war. So all these different factions of dragons are different sides of the war and have different alliances, and this also I feel like had undercurrents of some more serious themes as well, and there's so much heart. The characters, there's a ruthlessness to the dragons. I think that is one of the things, and the undercurrents of war that are going on. There's also this prophecy element. First book is called The Dragonet Prophecy, and so these 5 dragonettes, these younger dragons, they're training to kind of fulfill this prophecy, and they're so sweet. And especially the mud dragon, like Clay. He has so much heart and he's such a lovable, enduring character. I loved it. I would continue to read these books just whenever I felt like a good, cozy adventure. And I would say it's quite exciting as well, this one. So, really great find, super happy. I would give it a 5 stars. The second middle grade fantasy that I came across was The Mask of Aribella. I thought the cover was so beautiful. I felt drawn to it. And at the back, it uses 3 words to describe the book, which is magic, adventure, Venice. I loved it, and it stayed true to those 3 words. It was full of magic, full of adventure, and it was set in Venice. And the charm of Venice was captured so well from the get-go, from the beginning. It was beautiful. I loved all the descriptions of the city and the way they set it up. This had so many like classic fantasy elements. It reminded me of the early Harry Potter books, like the first few books where there's a coming of age when your magic is revealed, and then there's a process of kind of coming into this you could say somewhat school, but it's kind of different. But there's this magic school and there are these mentors, and then there's a lot of adventure that these kids end up going on or end up being destined for in some way. But this was such a sweet story. I loved her quality of writing, her descriptions of the atmosphere and the place itself, even in terms of emotions. She used some really interesting phrases. So I thought the writing was beautiful. This is actually her debut novel, which is amazing. I would read more books by her. I think she only has 1 other book out. So another 5-star read. I loved it. Okay, so coming to some classic fantasy, I have put off reading anything by Tolkien for so long. I've loved The Lord of the Rings, the movies. I've seen all 3 of them. I have seen the Hobbit movies as well. I've seen the extended cuts. I've just loved it. I've seen it multiple times. It's been a couple of years since I saw it though. I was somewhat intimidated, I could say, because I thought it was classic fantasy, so the language, it would be more complex and maybe I just wouldn't enjoy reading it as much. But when I saw that The Hobbit is not really very long a book, it's just one standalone book, I decided it's time to read a classic by Tolkien. And I have to say that initially when I started reading it, I was struck by the language and the sense of humor that it had. I wasn't expecting it. I didn't know what to expect, and this was just such a great travel adventure. I think there are so many themes that are explored within it. Bilbo is such an endearing character, and he has so much heart and bravery, and then just the interactions with all the other people and how he comes to be respected eventually. It was full of so many different characters. I mean, there are dragons, there are dwarves, there are elves, there are wargs, there are eagles, there are wizards, there's everything. The hobbits, everything that you can think of. It's there. It's so rich in terms of the fantasy elements and like the world that it's building upon. I was surprised, I have to say, to find out that I thought this was written as a prequel, but apparently Lord of the Rings was written after this. So it's amazing how he expanded on this world to the degree that he did, but how much this one book has, which allowed him to just expand it in that way. I would read this book again. This is actually the perfect classic cozy adventure, and it's also signifies this element of adventure that we all look for and seek in life, the little Tookish in all of us, but also how we seek to go home eventually, or sometimes want that comfort zone, and it's hard to come out of the comfort zone as well. And I found it was so funny. There were so many moments on their travels where they just they didn't have enough food and they were just constantly hungry. And their conversations and interactions at those points in time, there was just the frustrations that they had. It was really, really good. It was just so good. And this is a book that I ended up reading throughout the month. I read it very slowly, but somewhere midway through, I fell into a rhythm with it, and I loved the feeling of just having this book with me wherever I was. Throughout this month. And even if I was reading other books, this is the one that I would just kind of it was just very cozy. I would slip into and then just get back into this adventure. So I'm so happy I read this. super 5-star read, and I am ready to get to reading Lord of the Rings as well, the entire trilogy. I think that's going to be next on my list. I'm not sure if I'll get to it, in June, July, but we'll see. The next book I want to talk about is The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea. This was enchanting, magical, mysterious, mystical in nature. I loved that. I loved reading a story which had Eastern influences. I'm from India, so there are a lot of like little cultural elements that I could relate to. It was such a colorful, interesting world beneath the sea, and it had a really beautiful message. I thought there were parts of it which were very thought-provoking and reflective in nature, and I also loved the main character. She exhibited qualities of compassion and understanding, and I think it's lovely to see stories celebrate some softer qualities as well. And so I felt like this story did that. It also explored themes of family, love, mystical beings, gods, faiths, sacrifice, beliefs, and then the interconnected nature of the world as well, where you're seeking a sense of balance or harmony. It was a very refreshing read. It felt very original from the point of view of all the more Western influenced books that I read in the fantasy world. So this is a Korean retelling. So I just absolutely love the Eastern fantasy element that it brought about. The prose of the book, it's very beautifully written. I really liked this author's writing. I would want to explore some other works of hers as well. This was such a surprising read, and I'm so happy I came across this. It's actually motivating me to read some other books which have Eastern influences as well. So I'm kind of on the lookout. The next on my list are Daughter of the Moon Goddess. I think that's the duology. And then there's also Six Crimson Cranes. I think they would have a similar quality of the fantasy. And I love books which in their writing, they just weave together a lot of reflective and thought-provoking elements with the story, so that you're able to take away more from it, like more of the messages, more of the meaning, and it just poses certain questions to you, and it makes you think. So I love stories like that, and this was such a beautifully written one. An absolute 5-star read for me. I loved it. The next book that I read in fantasy was A Study in Drowning. So this is a dark academic fantasy, and I haven't read anything of this nature. I finally understood what people mean when they say the novel was very atmospheric. This was definitely very atmospheric in the descriptions. I thought Eva Reid, her writing was beautiful. I also felt like she captured a lot of the anxiety, panic, and internal emotional state of the main character really well. But what I loved is that she actually changes and grows and evolves and learns to understand certain things about herself. And even if there were elements that I didn't like, what I liked is that the characters were very self-aware, and I think that makes a great deal of difference for me. Like sometimes even if there are traits that if I'm not enjoying reading or can't relate to, or maybe I don't like, but if I can understand why they are the way they are, and if they are not just being immature or something, without any understanding of it, if they have a sense of self-awareness, I feel like that makes a huge difference in lending meaning to their journey and their experiences on the whole, like when you're following these characters. On the whole, I love that this was a really great academic mystery. I love the elements of Preston and Effie working together to actually solve these mysteries. So that was really cool. And I also really enjoyed the academic aspect of it in terms of the intellectual debates that they were having with each other and just these thoughtful conversations. I loved Preston as a character for some reason. I don't know, just the way he thought and put across his thoughts, and just his personality as well. I really liked him. So I really enjoyed it once Effie calmed down and she was able to really engage with him. I think that made it very interesting, and I also thought it was meaningful in terms of Effie's journey of finding her own voice, overcoming her fears, and making sense of, her realities. Also, it really uncovered this aspect of, when you're so attached or you really look up to someone or something, and something that you really believe with all your heart to be true and you rely upon, and when that truth or reality is comes into question or comes crumbling down, how do you deal with it, and what does that leave you with? So I thought this was a very interesting book. Some of the darker elements in terms of the mystery of the fairy king, I can't say I liked it. I did not like the manner at all, and then just it's how it was meant to be, but I just did not like it. And there's some other elements also in the beginning of the book, in the way that it's started off with, that I didn't quite enjoy. I would actually be open to reading any other book by Ava Reid. I think she's a really good author, but I really enjoyed it. I would give it a 3.75. Yeah, I think that's the rating I would leave this with. So this is definitely a good, interesting read. Coming to the contemporary romance category, so I actually don't read a lot of contemporary romance. I just find that this genre is something I love watching. I love watching a movie, I love watching a TV show. I just feel it's able to visually, with the music and what you see on screen with the characters, there's so much that you're able to capture just through just observing behavior and these quieter moments, and you don't have to say anything. And I don't know, I've just maybe not had the best experience with books, contemporary romance books. I also find that sometimes I get very bored, or just very typical. So it's just more interesting for me to watch it come to life on a screen. But I thought I would give some contemporary romance a try after a very long time, actually. So I came across Sweet Tomorrows by Debbie McComber in the library. So I just loved the cover, and this seemed like a small town romance. I wanted lighter reads, and I didn't want anything fantasy. So I thought, let me read some romance. But the thing with this book was, maybe it's the fifth in this like Rose Harbor Inn series. It was very reminiscent in nature to things and events that had happened in some of the previous ones, which maybe was part of why the stories that they explored in this book didn't have time to develop. But regardless of that aspect, I found that the romance element in these books, like, these are adults, these are 30 plus adults, I just found it was so immature, and some of the dialogue writing was also very cheesy, kind of corny. It lacked depth. So it started off nice. I thought it would be a nice light read, but it just kind of got worse as I went along. It felt very flat for me, and it was also repetitive, in terms of constantly saying that this Rose Harbor Inn is this very magical place that brings people together and just weaves magic, and unexpected things happen, and like this kind of surreal quality to it, which I would like. But in the way that the writing was portraying this was not communicating that feeling, and also it felt like it's telling me that more than it's showing me that. Just let me see things happen in this magical, surreal way, and like the way things are brought together. That was my one thing with this. And then the male characters were all very, I don't know, just immature. It was just really immature. So I think I would probably rate it 1.75. Yeah, 2 maybe. And I don't think I would read anything more by this author based on my experience with this book. The next contemporary romance that I read was Emily Henry's People We Meet on Vacation. I've seen a lot of her books being very popular, so I thought, let me try her out as an author for contemporary romance, and I actually really loved it. I thought it was very interesting in the way that she kept going back and forth in time and building up the story to this moment which fractured this relationship that these two had, the two main characters had, and how they kind of also come back into each other's lives. I did feel like the story was stretched a little too much, but what I loved about it was that the quality of writing generally made me feel like I was watching a movie. And I think she takes inspirations from those kind of movies, and so I could tell that with her writing. I like the characters, I like the emotional depth. I think even though it was their story was kind of stretched out in the way that they came back together, or the way that they avoided getting together for as long as they did, which feels a little frustrating and like, okay, but I think the reasonings given, I think that supported it well, instead of it becoming just something that didn't make sense or being annoying. I would give it a 4 stars actually. I think it was a really good read. I enjoyed it. I was surprised. I liked her writing style. Her quality of writing was good. And yeah, that's it for the contemporary romance. So the one mystery book that I read this month was The Number One Ladies Detective Agency by Alexander McCall Smith. So he's a South African writer, if I'm not mistaken. But this particular book was set in Botswana, and this is the first time I've read a book with African characters, and where it's also set in African. So there were a lot of little elements of the African culture that came through in this book, which was very interesting from a reading perspective. I also thought it was really beautiful in terms of the connection to the land that was portrayed, by the characters, and in terms of the simplicity of life that existed for them, and certain aspects of the history of the place as well. So there was the second chapter. I thought it was really emotional and touching. I found it was from the perspective of the main character's father. So she's actually a private detective in Botswana, and she kind of helps out a lot of locally. She helps out on a lot of different cases. So this wasn't a typical kind of mystery, I would say. This was very much so like a slice of life kind of mystery, and it was interwoven with a lot of personal backstory of the private detective, like the main character and her family background, and then in terms of just different day-to-day things that life has. So I thought this was a really lovely read. There is a series of books, so I would actually be open to maybe reading some more. This particular book I would rate about 3.75. Could have rated it a 4, but yeah, this just feels right. It was very different. I will say that the writing language was very like the author is speaking, it's somebody speaking to you. So the flow of reading it was very easy and it was very simple, but I thought it touched upon some really beautiful elements of the story and like the place, and yeah, I really enjoyed reading this book. So towards the end of the month, I ended up reading some short contemporary literary fiction. So one of the books is one I just came across in the library called The White Crow. It's by an Indian author. So I thought, let me try it out. It was nice. It's very metaphorical in nature, and it has a family and kingdom of crows. Essentially, it has certain layers of significance, and it's interesting. And it's kind of being different from what everyone expects you to be. There's this white crow in a world of black crows, and how he finds his way, finds his purpose, and finds a sense of belonging, but also finds the things that makes him unique and makes him stand out, and kind of discovers his own strengths in those differences. So I think this was a very meaningful, thoughtful book. In terms of the writing, I think I liked it for the most part. Maybe I would rate it a 2.75, maybe 3. It had a good message, and I think it was interesting. Yeah. So this was one. And then I read The Blue Umbrella by Ruskin Bond. So Ruskin Bond is actually a nationally acclaimed Indian author. So in our English literature classes through school, we've covered some of his works and learned them as a part of our classes. But this is one book that I hadn't read. I had it with me for the longest time, and I know it's supposed to be like one of his good works. So I finally read it. This was just so lovely, so sweet, such an enduring story. It's about this girl who kind of barters and gets this blue umbrella, and she's from this small village, so you get a slice of life in a small village in India, and just how this is her most prized possessions, and then also how everybody else sees this in this little village. And it's kind of the study of even human human psyche or human behavior as well, in terms of how other people perceive her and with this umbrella and what they want. It's really sweet, and the ending it's so good. Like, it touched my heart, and I would give this a 5 stars. So it was just such a sweet, lovely, meaningful story, and it really explores certain, touches upon these human emotions and the human psyche. So yeah, I would, it's a very short book. So I loved it. 5-star read. I'm glad I finally got around to reading this. And then I have this book, 50 Greatest Short Stories. I read the Curious Case of Benjamin Button from this. I didn't know that it was this short. I thought the story was longer. I didn't like it at all. It felt awkward and very uncomfortable. I think that's somewhat the purpose of the story, so I'll give it that. But there were one or two points where I could, feel like thoughtful about it. Okay, in terms of from the story's perspective, but on the whole, I didn't like it at all. It was not good. Just the feeling of reading it was just bad. Like it's so uncomfortable, and the dialogues were just weird and awkward. And I don't know what to say. It's a very strange, very strange story. So yeah, that's it for all the short literary fictions that I read. I had a really great fun reading month, and I'm looking forward to reading more books in June. That's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again next time. Bye.